The first sign that something was wrong came in the form of silence. Not the peaceful kind you expect on a forested autumn morning, but the kind that holds its breath, tight, expectant, like the woods themselves knew a storm was coming. Eric Johnson crouched low behind a patch of overgrown sumac at the edge of his property, the chill of October frost biting through his gloves. He adjusted the scope on his rifle and focused downrange, where a broad-chested buck stood at the edge of the tree line. A textbook shot, if not for the nagging tension that hadn't left him since sunrise. There was again not a sound, but the absence of one. No beat of sun, no distant rustle of squirrels, just the wind dragging its cold fingers across the leaves. Something's off. He eased up, letting the rifle hang by its sling, and glanced behind him toward the old cedar fence that marked the invisible, yet sacred, boundary between his 5-acre refuge and the rest of the world. His boots crunched faintly as he stood. Nothing unusual at first, just the trees swaying and his breath fogging in the air. But then he saw her, a flash of silver hair, a fixed glare from behind sunglasses that glinted with a kind of polished hatred. She was standing still on the opposite end of the property line like a gargoyle in activewear, arms folded, back straight, as if summoned there by the scent of liberty. Eric didn't wave. He'd seen her before. That was Rebecca Gray, HOA president, local tyrant, and someone who treated the phrase property values the way a preacher clings to scripture. She had a reputation. One of those people who talked more about community than they did to the people living in it. The kind who made themselves powerful by enforcing rules no one remembered voting on. She raised her phone slowly, not to wave or take a photo, but to dial. That simple act made Eric's stomach turn colder than the air. And yet, he didn't flinch. He picked up his orange safety vest from a nearby log, slung his rifle carefully over one shoulder, and walked back toward his porch with the poise of someone who had nothing to hide, but everything to defend. The kind of man who respected laws because he helped write them. The wind shifted, and behind him, the buck vanished back into the woods like it knew the hunt was postponed. By the time he stepped onto his porch, the first police cruiser was already easing down the gravel drive, tires cracking twigs as it approached. Officer Martinez stepped out slowly, radio clipped to his chest and notebook in hand. He gave Eric a tired nod, one not of judgment, but of expectation. This wasn't his first HOA complaint. "She call you?" Eric asked, voice calm but firm. Martinez nodded. "Said you were hunting illegally, near a residential zone, endangering residents." Eric exhaled through his nose and pulled out his leather-bound folio from the porch bench. He handed over a laminated card and a folded document. Federal Wildlife Officer ID, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Active duty, plus a permit for use of the preserve that bordered his land, hunting for research and game control. Martinez looked it over, brow rising slightly. "You a Fed?" "I don't advertise it," Eric replied, folding his arms. "But yeah, and every round fired here is logged, timed, and filed." The officer looked past him toward the woods. "She said you had a deer carcass. I field dressed it, on federal preserve land, 50 yards past my fence line. Clean, ethical, legal." Martinez gave a grunt and scratched something into his notepad. "Mind if I have a look?" "Just a formality." Eric gestured toward the back trail. "Be my guest." As the officer disappeared into the trees, Eric turned and looked again toward the street. Rebecca was gone now, just tire tracks in the loose gravel where she'd stood like a suburban warden. But her shadow remained. Eric sat down on the porch swing, poured the last of his orange juice from the thermos, and took a long sip. The silence returned. But now it wasn't peaceful. It was a prelude. A war had just been declared, and only one of them knew it. 3 days passed. The silence broke, but not in the way Eric had hoped. It started with a letter taped to his mailbox. Typed in all caps, signed R. Gray, HOA president, and sealed with a smug flourish and permanent marker. The message was precise, but venomous. "You are in violation of community regulations 7A and 9C. Unauthorized weapons discharge and unsafe wildlife handling. You have 7 days to remedy before further action is taken." Eric stared at the paper for a long time, his jaw set, There were no such regulations in the HOA charter. He'd read it back to front before buying the land. Twice. It had been one of the selling points. Minimal interference, loose oversight, and no micromanagement. But Rebecca Gray didn't need real rules. She made her own. Back inside, he pinned the letter to the corkboard above his desk, next to the hunting maps, permit renewals, and a single photo of his father holding a rifle beside a young, grinning Eric. That photo had been with him in Afghanistan, in his cabin up north, and now here, watching silently as Eric fought a new kind of war. A slower one, with paperwork instead of bullets. That night, as the sun bled into the tree line, Eric watched the neighbor's SUV cruise by again. Slower this time. Lights off. Then another pass 20 minutes later. He stood quietly under the porch light, not hiding, just waiting. Let her see him. Let her know he saw her, too. The next morning, it escalated. A thick envelope arrived in his mailbox, this time certified. Official HOA letterhead, heavy with the perfume of faux authority. Inside, a formal violation citation detailing fines totaling $2,000, accusations of reckless hunting behavior, community endangerment, and unauthorized land use adjacent to federal holdings. Eric chuckled darkly. Adjacent to federal holdings? He muttered. You mean the actual federal holdings I manage? But he wasn't laughing long. Attached to the fine were time-stamped surveillance photos. Grainy, but clearly taken from across the street. His truck parked at the trailhead. Him walking out with his gear. One shot even captured him field dressing a buck, from a serious distance, and with what had to be an expensive zoom lens. She was watching him, tracking him. He flipped the page. The fine was signed. Rebecca Gray, President, HOA Enforcement Committee CC. Local law enforcement, so this wasn't bluster anymore. It was a campaign. A coordinated, tactical smear from someone who thought intimidation looked like legalese and passive-aggressive stationery. Eric leaned back in his chair and rubbed his temples. This wasn't about gunshots. It wasn't even about hunting. This was control. And something told him Rebecca had controlled people like this before, with bureaucracy, fake fines, and enough aggression masked as civic duty to make the average neighbor back down. But Eric wasn't average. He pulled out a fresh manila folder and labeled it with a sharp black pen. Gray. Rebecca. Documentation inside went the letter, the photos, the citation. He slid a USB drive from his desk drawer and began backing up video footage from his trail cameras, too. Not just deer activity, but any car that lingered near the edge of the property. There were patterns already. Her SUV showed up almost daily. Once after midnight. He hadn't wanted this to become something bigger. But when people like Rebecca were left unchecked, they didn't stop. They escalated. They believed silence meant surrender. That evening, Eric made 2 phone calls. The first was to a woman named Amanda, the soft-spoken HOA secretary he'd only met in passing, polite but visibly nervous, always glancing over her shoulder at meetings. She answered after 2 rings. Amanda, this is Eric Johnson from Cedar Hill Drive. I need to ask a few questions, off the record. A pause. Then, I've been expecting your call. The second call was to his old Army buddy, now an attorney specializing in civil litigation and land rights. Ryan, Eric said, his voice low but calm. I think I'm about to sue my HOA president. There was a beat of silence, then a laugh on the other end. Tell me everything. Outside, dusk settled over the property like a curtain dropping before a second act. The trees were still again. But this time, the silence wasn't ominous. It was the kind that comes just before a storm. Rain tapped on the windows like fingers too impatient to knock. Eric sat at his desk, surrounded by printouts, permits, aerial maps, and a growing wall of documentation. For the first time in years, he felt like he was back on the battlefield. Not a literal one, but no less strategic. Every move needed precision. Every word had to land like a bullet. Across the room, his phone buzzed. Amanda, HOA secretary, can we talk? In person, not at the office, not on the phone. He responded with a single word. Location. 20 minutes later, they sat in a corner booth at an all-night diner off the highway. The rain had followed them there, drumming hard against the glass as trucks rolled past in the distance. Amanda looked nothing like the timid secretary from HOA meetings. Her hair was damp, her eyes bloodshot, a woman unraveling. "I can't keep doing this," she whispered, hands trembling around her coffee cup. "She's out of control." Eric didn't speak. He just nodded, letting the silence make room for her to keep going. "She's been forging documents. HOA meeting minutes that never happened. Board votes that were never taken. She even made me sign things, fake approvals, fake violations." Amanda reached into her purse and pulled out a small black USB stick. She slid it across the table. "Everything's on here. Emails, edited documents, photos, even one of a forged complaint filed in your name." Eric stared at it, his pulse steady but heavy. This wasn't just neighbor drama anymore. This was criminal. "She's tracking your movements," Amanda continued, her voice shaking. "Your truck, your house, even your trash. She has a file labeled Wildlife Officer, Target Risk. She thinks if she builds enough of a case, she can force you out before anyone notices." Eric picked up the flash drive and slid it into his coat pocket, never breaking eye contact. "Why are you doing this now?" Amanda swallowed. "Because I know what's coming next. She's planning something. She said it's the final blow, some kind of formal complaint to the county about endangering public safety. And if that doesn't work, she said she'd make you wish you never moved here." Eric sat back, exhaling slowly. He'd faced snipers, IEDs, and ambushes in foreign countries. But this kind of war, a war of manipulation and paper cuts, was harder to see coming. "You're doing the right thing," he said quietly. Amanda looked at him, eyes glistening. "It doesn't feel like it." "It will," he said. "Soon." She left shortly after, glancing over her shoulder like she expected Rebecca to materialize from the rain. Back home, Eric didn't sleep. He plugged in a flash drive and began going through it file by file. What he saw hollowed his stomach. Photos, dozens, him stepping out of the woods. Zoomed-in shots of his face mid-conversation. One image was taken through the crack in his garage, showing his rifles neatly locked in a wall rack. There were time-stamped logs with eerie precision. Johnson spotted at Trailhead 6:43. Rifle case loaded 7:01. This was more than harassment. It was stalking. But it was the forged HOA minutes that sealed it. A fake vote claiming unanimous approval for his fine, with signatures from board members who'd moved out 6 months prior. An email chain from Rebecca to Amanda instructing her to pad the file with whatever makes him look negligent. And worst of all, a draft of a complaint addressed to the county sheriff's office, accusing Eric of firing military-grade weaponry within a residential zone. It was an attempt to criminalize him. He leaned back in his chair and stared at the screen, the light casting shadows across the maps on the wall. His own name had become a weapon, twisted into a liability by someone who had no idea who she was dealing with. That's when he made the decision. No more reactive defense. No more letting her write the rules. It was time to go on offense. He picked up the phone and called his lawyer. "She's planning to file a formal complaint," Eric said. "We're not going to stop her." A pause. "You're letting her file it?" "I'm inviting her to," Eric replied, voice cold and precise. "Then I'm going to take her down. Legally. Publicly. Completely." Outside, the rain softened, but the storm was far from over. Eric didn't hear her car at first. It was the motion alert on the perimeter camera that got his attention. 2:18 nachts. He stood barefoot in the dark, watching the grainy night vision feed on his tablet. Headlights off, a vehicle rolling slowly down the gravel road like a shadow with wheels. Then it stopped, and there she was, Rebecca Gray, in a long black coat, hood up, clipboard in one hand, bolt cutters in the other. Eric didn't move. He just started recording. She walked up to the side fence, paused, then began cutting. Snap! Snap! Each section of wire she clipped made a sound like a judge's gavel, decisive, permanent. He watched her wedge a garish wooden stake into the soil and hammer a crudely painted sign into place. Private property. Hunting prohibited. By order of the HOA. Rebecca stepped back, admiring her work like it was a gallery installation. Then she pulled out her phone and dialed. Eric couldn't hear her words, but her gestures told the story. Exaggerated, frantic, like she was describing a hostage crisis. She was reporting him, Again. But this time, from inside the crime scene she just created. He stared at the screen, and for a brief second, he felt something, not anger, but something colder. A resignation. The quiet that comes right before a trigger pull. That final heartbeat when there's no going back. He opened the drawer beside his desk and pulled out the badge. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Federal Wildlife Officer. He never expected to use it this way. Not here. Not for this. By the time the first patrol car rolled in at 2:41 a.m., Rebecca was pacing his lawn, arms crossed like a general inspecting the battlefield. Officer Martinez stepped out of the vehicle again, face drawn with exhaustion. Eric met him halfway. "Good morning," Eric said, calm but clipped. "She called you again, didn't she?" Martinez nodded. "Said you were in violation of community hunting laws. Claims you brandished a firearm earlier tonight." "I've been asleep," Eric replied. "But I have footage you'll want to see." Rebecca rushed forward, breath steaming in the cold, her tone already shrill. "He's endangering the neighborhood. I caught him violating our hunting ban. Look at the sign. This is HOA designated territory." Martinez gave her a slow blink. "Ma'am, you can't designate someone else's property." Rebecca's lip curled. "You don't understand. He's dangerous." "He's officer," Eric said, interrupting. "I think it's time I show you something." Inside, he played the security footage, every step, every cut, every swing of Rebecca's hammer. Multiple angles, crisp timestamps, high-definition audio. Martinez stared in silence, jaw tight. She vandalized federal monitoring equipment, trespassed with tools, and falsified regulatory claims. Eric said, then added, "And I believe she's about to file a fabricated criminal complaint." "That explains a lot," Martinez muttered. But it wasn't over. Eric clicked one final file, an audio recording Amanda had sent just hours earlier. A voicemail Rebecca accidentally left on the HOA office line. "He won't see it coming. Once the police get my statement, I don't care what badge he flashes. He'll be discredited. I'll bury him in paper if I have to. I'll make him wish he never bought that land." Martinez straightened. "That's harassment and obstruction, maybe more." But Rebecca wasn't done yet. When they stepped back outside, she was waiting at the porch steps, her eyes burning with twisted triumph. She reached into her coat and handed Martinez a thick manila envelope. "Official complaint," she declared. "Signed, dated, witness statements, everything the DA will need." Martinez opened it, scanned the first page, then raised an eyebrow. "This is creative." Rebecca smiled smugly. "He thought he could intimidate me, but no one's above the rules." Eric stepped forward. "You're right. No one is." He held out his badge. Her smile faltered. "Eric Johnson, Federal Wildlife Officer. Sworn jurisdiction over this land and the adjoining preserve. Your interference tonight wasn't just a neighborhood dispute." He paused. "It's a federal crime." Rebecca's face cracked. The blood drained so fast she swayed. I didn't know, but you did know," Eric cut in. "You just didn't care." Martinez stepped forward, voice firm. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to stay right here while I make a call." Rebecca's mouth opened, but nothing came out. The line had been crossed, and now it was her turn to answer for it. Rebecca didn't run. She froze, like prey, finally realizing the predator wasn't bluffing. Eric had seen that look before, on a battlefield, on faces who pushed too far, too fast, only to find themselves staring into the yawning mouth of consequence. Martinez spoke softly into his shoulder mic, relaying the situation to dispatch. But his eyes stayed locked on Rebecca, watching, measuring. A second cruiser arrived, then a third. The flashing lights carved streaks across the cedar trees, painting the house in shifting reds and blues. What had once been a peaceful corner of the woods now looked like a crime scene from a documentary. Eric stood still, arms folded across his chest, the wind stirring the hem of his flannel shirt. Inside his chest, something settled. Not pride, not satisfaction, relief. This wasn't about revenge. Not anymore. This was about removal, like cutting out a disease. "Ma'am," Martinez said, stepping toward her, "you're being detained for questioning in connection with trespassing, harassment, falsified documentation, and obstruction of a federal investigation." Rebecca blinked, disoriented. Investigation? What investigation? Eric stepped closer. His voice was quiet, not cruel, just final. You try to weaponize the system against me. And in doing so, you revealed you've been running your own little regime in this neighborhood for years. I'm not the only one. From a house, Amanda stepped forward. She'd arrived quietly, unnoticed, but now stood just behind the officers, not hiding, not afraid. In her hands was a folder, thick, stuffed with copied HOA records, ledger printouts, forged documents, and financial statements. Tell them about the pool. Rebecca, Amanda said. Her voice didn't shake anymore. The $3,200 in landscaping for your own yard. The fake repairs. The forged votes. Rebecca's eyes darted wildly. You traitor. Amanda stepped up beside Eric. No, just tired of being afraid of you. The other officers circled now. Not threatening, just present. Real, legal, inevitable. Rebecca opened her mouth, but whatever she meant to say curdled behind her teeth. Ma'am, Martinez said, as another officer produced a pair of cuffs. Turn around. No, she whispered. No, this isn't how it ends. I'm the president. I make the rules. Eric tilted his head. And now the rules are making you pay. She turned on him then, fast, a blur of black coat and screaming rage. You think you're better than me? You think some badge makes you untouchable? It was desperate, empty, a final flare from a star collapsing in on itself. Eric didn't flinch. I don't think I'm untouchable, he said. I just know what the law actually is. The cuffs clicked shut behind her back. In that sound, something broke in her spine, her face, maybe her entire story. The fire drained out of her, and all that was left was silence. Amanda exhaled next to him, a sound so long-held it came out like wind escaping a cracked window. Around them, the neighborhood began to stir. Lights flicked on behind curtains. Doors opened. Shadows gathered. People who had lived in quiet fear, stepping into the night like prisoners blinking in sunlight. The officers guided Rebecca to the cruiser. As she passed Eric, she locked eyes with him. But the hate was gone. In its place was something worse. Recognition. She finally understood who she'd picked a fight with, and how deeply she'd lost. You'll regret this, she muttered. Eric didn't reply, because there was nothing left to say. The door closed behind her. The cruiser pulled away. Just like that, the shadow lifted. Amanda turned to him, voice low. You just changed this whole place. Eric looked out at the forest. No, he said. She did. He paused. I just ended it. And as the last patrol car vanished down the gravel road, he realized something unexpected. He felt sorry for her, not because she'd lost, but because she never understood the difference between control and community, between fear and respect. And now, it had cost her everything. 1 week later, the forest exhaled. It wasn't anything dramatic. No fireworks, no parades. Just the sound of leaves rustling through the tall oaks again. The birds had returned to the edge of the property. The deer, too, stepping cautiously across the clearing, as if they sensed the tension had drained from the soil. Eric sat on his porch swing, boots off, flannel sleeves rolled up, a mug of coffee resting on the armrest beside him. Steam curled lazily into the morning air. Amanda had stopped by earlier that morning with a final update. Rebecca was being held pending formal charges, embezzlement, criminal misrepresentation, trespassing, harassment. The list was longer than expected. Turns out you weren't the first, Amanda had said, setting down a folder of victim statements. You were just the one who stood up. She'd offered him the interim HOA chair seat. He declined. He had no interest in power, only peace. Across the street, a pair of neighborhood kids rode their bikes in looping circles, laughing without fear of being reprimanded for sidewalk disruption. An elderly couple down the road was repainting their mailbox pastel blue. Rebecca would have fined them for it last month. Now, they were doing it with music playing from a little radio and a cooler of iced tea between them. Small changes. Quiet ones, but change nonetheless. Eric reached into the side drawer of his porch bench and pulled out the envelope Amanda had left with him earlier. Inside was a handwritten note from one of the elderly residents. Thank you for restoring peace. for reminding us we weren't wrong to want it. You didn't just protect your land. You protected all of ours. Below that, several others had signed their names, some shaky, some bold. One included a child's drawing, a stick figure man with a badge standing next to a deer. He smiled, but it faded quickly. His eyes drifted across the fence line, rebuilt now. Reinforced, but not in defiance. In memory. Some scars don't show. Others you leave as markers. So you don't forget how close you came to losing something simple, like the right to sit still. He stood and walked to the edge of the property. The autumn light slanted through the trees, scattering gold across the grass. His boots sank into the familiar dirt as he moved toward the edge of the clearing. The wooden stake Rebecca had pounded into his lawn, the ridiculous no hunting by order of the HOA sign, had been pulled up days ago. He hadn't burned it. He kept it. It stood now at the back of his shed, faded and cracked. Not a trophy, not a warning, just proof that peace, when tested, has teeth. He ran a hand along the top of the new fence, then paused. From the woods, a buck stepped forward, cautious, ears flicking. The same one, maybe, or just another drawn by the stillness. Eric didn't move, didn't raise a scope, didn't need to. Some things, when hard won, deserve to be left untouched. Behind him, the house was quiet. No papers stacked with false citations. No knocks at the door. No voice screaming about regulations. Just wind, birds, the creak of a clean porch swing. He turned, walking slowly back toward the porch. As he sat again, the phone buzzed. A message from Amanda. The HOA board voted to dissolve all of Rebecca's legacy policies. You're officially cleared of everything. Also, we're planning a barbecue next weekend. You're the guest of honor. He smiled. Not at the honor, but at the invitation. The kind that came without threats or conditions. Just a neighbor reaching out to another. He typed a short reply. I'll bring the venison. Then he leaned back, mug in hand, and closed his eyes. And for the first time in a long time, the silence felt exactly as it should, not a warning, but a welcome. Sometimes the loudest victories don't make a sound at all.